My family didn't tell me about a relative's funeral. I found out weeks later that a close relative had passed away and the funeral had already happened. When I asked why I wasn't informed, they shrugged it off, saying they assumed I was busy. I've always believed that family was supposed to be your safety net, the one place where you were never left in the dark. My name is Ava. I'm 29, and I work as a marketing specialist in a busy downtown office in a Midwestern American city. Every morning, I rush through my routine: a strong cup of coffee, a quick scroll through social media updates, and a pep talk to myself before I face another day full of deadlines and meetings. But behind the well-practiced smiles and carefully planned schedules lies an undercurrent of pain and neglect that I've grown accustomed to over the years. My relationship with my relatives has always been a complicated patchwork of affection, misunderstandings, and occasional silences. I have 2 younger siblings and a handful of cousins scattered around, but despite the apparent closeness, I've often felt like an afterthought. Family gatherings sometimes feel like exclusive clubs where secret conversations and inside jokes leave me wondering if I ever truly belonged. I've brushed off the sting of these moments, chalking them up to busy schedules and miscommunications. I thought it was just the nature of our modern lives. Everyone's too busy to check in as often as they should. One crisp morning, as I was heading into work, I received a cryptic text from a cousin I rarely heard from. The message was short, almost dismissive. "We need to talk. Call me when you can." I assumed it was another reminder of some trivial matter, maybe even a plan for an upcoming reunion. The day went by in a blur of meetings and deadlines. And that text, like so many others, faded into the background of my busy routine. I didn't think twice about it until the whispers began circulating among friends and distant relatives that something was terribly amiss. Later that week, while I was wrapping up an important project at the office, a close colleague mentioned in passing how odd it was that I hadn't been included in a recent family conversation. "You know, they all seem to be talking about something, but you never get an invite to any of the get-togethers anymore," he said, a frown creasing his brow. I shrugged it off, blaming my hectic schedule and my habit of always putting work first. But deep down, a prickling sensation of unease began to grow. Had I really been so detached, or was there something more deliberate at play? That night, lying in bed as the city's hum filtered through my window, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing out on something important. My thoughts kept returning to the vague text and the quiet looks I'd noticed in the last few family gatherings. I wondered, with a mixture of dread and curiosity, if there was an event, a moment of grief or celebration that I'd been purposefully excluded from. The idea seemed impossible at first, but then a slow, sinking realization began to form. What if I had been left out of one of the most significant moments in our family's history? Before I drifted off to sleep, a single troubling thought echoed in my mind. Why didn't they tell me? Little did I know that this question would soon unravel everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and belonging. The following Monday, my day took a dark and unexpected turn. I was checking my social media feed during a lull at work when I noticed a series of posts that made my heart race. One post in particular caught my eye, a candid photo of a small, somber gathering. The caption read, "Saying goodbye to Aunt Lorraine. Her spirit lives on." I stared at the image, disbelief freezing my thoughts. Aunt Lorraine had been my favorite relative, always cheerful at family picnics, her laughter infectious, a quiet force of kindness in a sometimes callous world. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the comments and messages from extended family members. Each post, each remark confirmed the unthinkable. Aunt Lorraine had passed away weeks ago, but no one had told me. I felt a crushing wave of betrayal, as if a piece of my own history had been erased without explanation. My mind raced. Why had they decided I was too busy to grieve? Was it truly an innocent oversight, or had I been deliberately left out? I immediately called my cousin Lisa, the one who had sent that cryptic message last week. "Lisa, why wasn't I told about Aunt Lorraine's funeral?" I demanded, my voice cracking with a mix of anger and sorrow. On the other end of the line, there was a long, awkward pause before she replied in a tone that managed to be both dismissive and patronizing. "We assumed you were too busy, Ava. I'm sorry, but things moved fast." The words echoed in my mind like a slap, leaving me reeling with a sense of isolation I'd never experienced before. For the rest of the day, I found it hard to focus. Every detail around me, colleagues chatting, the hum of the office printer, the soft murmur of background conversations seemed to underscore the absence of the family connection I had once. Taken for granted, I left work early, my thoughts a jumbled mess of memories and accusations. In the solitude of my small apartment, I replayed every missed phone call, every invitation that never came, and every sideways glance at family events. It was as if I had been living on the fringes of my own family story, a ghost quietly watching the world go by without my input. That night, as I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, I began to compile a mental list of every time I'd felt sidelined. Each memory was a piece of evidence, slowly constructing a narrative of exclusion that I couldn't ignore any longer. I wasn't just upset about Aunt Lorraine's passing. I was furious that I had been rendered invisible at a moment when I should have been allowed to mourn. My heart pounded with a fierce determination. I had to get to the bottom of this, no matter how painful the truth might be. The next few days became a blur of restless phone calls and urgent messages. I reached out to other relatives, hoping that by piecing together their accounts, I might uncover some explanation for the omission. My brother Mark was the first I contacted. He was usually the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over family conflicts with a laugh and a shrug. But his tone was uncharacteristically subdued when I asked him, why didn't anyone tell me about Aunt Lorraine? After a long silence, he finally admitted, "Ava, you know how busy you are. We thought you wouldn't have time to attend, and things got so hectic. I'm sorry." His words, though seemingly apologetic, only deepened my sense of abandonment. As I reached out to cousins and distant aunts, I discovered that the excuses varied wildly, from vague statements about miscommunications to outright dismissals of my importance. One cousin, whom I barely knew, remarked casually, "You've always been the one buried in work. It's not like you cared much about these things anyway." The remark stung deeply. It wasn't just that I was forgotten. It was that I was assumed to be uncaring, too wrapped up in my own life to value family bonds. That perception was a bitter pill to swallow. In between these conversations, I found solace in solitary walks through the city at night. The cool breeze and the soft glow of streetlights provided a temporary escape from the relentless barrage of hurtful comments. On one such walk, I passed a small memorial set up in a quiet park corner, makeshift tribute to Aunt Lorraine, arranged by neighbors who had been touched by her kindness. Standing there, I allowed myself a moment of grief and reflection, feeling the weight of loss, not just for her, but for the family ties that had frayed long before this moment. Late one evening, while rummaging through old emails and text messages, on my laptop, I stumbled upon a forgotten thread from years past. In it, family members had enthusiastically planned a reunion that included everyone. No one, it seemed, had ever been left out. Reading the messages now, I couldn't help but feel that something had irrevocably changed. The warmth and inclusion of those past conversations were starkly contrasted by the cold indifference I was now experiencing. It made me wonder if this exclusion was a new development, or if it had been a slow drift toward neglect that I had somehow missed. Every piece of evidence I gathered painted a picture of a family that had quietly marginalized me over time. I began to suspect that the omission of Aunt Lorraine's funeral was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of unspoken assumptions and neglect in a mix of anger and determination. I started documenting every instance where I felt sidelined, a mental diary of missed moments and hurtful slights. I reached out to a close friend, Marissa, who had always been candid in her observations. Over a late-night coffee run, she confided, "Ava, it's not just about this funeral. I've seen it too many times. You're treated like an afterthought. You deserve better than this." Her words resonated deeply, fueling my resolve to confront the issues head-on. In the days that followed, the simmering resentment inside me evolved into a burning need for answers. I started planning a family gathering, a reunion of sorts, to address the mounting issues that had festered for too long. I carefully crafted an invitation stressing the importance of open communication and transparency, hoping that this meeting could finally mend the fractures that had divided us. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Emotions were raw and the wounds ran deep. Yet, I felt a responsibility not just to myself, but to every family member who had been hurt by this cycle of neglect. Preparations for the reunion took on a life of their own. I spent hours calling relatives individually, urging them to attend and emphasizing that this was not just another casual get-together, but a long overdue conversation about how we treated one another. During these calls, I was met with a range of reactions. Some expressed regret and promised to make things right, while others offered vague commitments and empty assurances. Each conversation added a new layer to my understanding of our family's dynamics, a web of miscommunications, assumptions, and unspoken resentments. In the midst of this hectic flurry of planning, I began to notice unexpected allies emerging. My cousin Rachel, whom I'd once considered distant due to her own busy life, reached out with genuine concern. "Ava, I've always felt like you were the one who cared most about keeping us together," she said softly during one of our long phone conversations. Her support, though not erasing the hurt, provided a glimmer of hope that perhaps not everyone in the family was indifferent. Then one evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I discovered an old family email chain from years ago that spoke of Aunt Lorraine's infectious humor, her generous spirit, and the ways she used to bridge differences among us. That email, filled with warm memories and nostalgic references, served as a stark reminder of what our family once was, a tight-knit group bound by love and mutual respect. The contrast between that past and my current feelings of abandonment was jarring, igniting in me a fierce determination to reclaim that sense of unity, even if it meant confronting painful truths. In the quiet hours before dawn, I penned a list of every incident, every casual remark, every overlooked invitation that had contributed to my current state of isolation. With each line, my resolve grew stronger. I could no longer allow myself to be treated as if I were disposable. This personal inventory was not just an act of recording grievances. It was a declaration that I was done being invisible. I would stand up, speak out, and demand the respect that I deserved, no matter the consequences. By the time the day of the reunion arrived, the tension was palpable. My heart pounded with a mixture of anger and anticipation as I prepared to face the family I had known for so long. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, whether apologies would be offered, misunderstandings cleared up, or if the confrontation would only open old wounds further. Yet, as I stepped into the living room of my childhood home, I felt an undeniable surge of determination. This was my chance to finally force the conversation that had been years in the making, to force my family to confront the painful truth of how their assumptions had cost me a piece of my identity. The reunion was set on a crisp Saturday afternoon in the old family home, a place that for decades had been a sanctuary of shared memories and laughter. As I walked through the familiar front door, I was struck by how much the house had changed. The walls, once adorned with vibrant family portraits, now held only a few faded images and a silence that spoke of estrangement. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was here to reclaim my narrative, not to wallow in old sorrows. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Conversations hummed in hushed tones among clusters of relatives, each group skirting around the subject that had haunted me for weeks. I sat at a long dining table with my siblings, cousins, and a few aunts and uncles who had gathered reluctantly. The clinking of silverware and murmurs of small talk provided a jarring counterpoint to the storm brewing inside me, unable to contain the mounting pressure any longer. I cleared my throat and began speaking, my voice quivering with raw emotion. "I have something important to say," I declared, cutting through the half-hearted pleasantries. The room fell silent as every eye turned towards me. I found out through social media that Aunt Lorraine passed away and that her funeral happened weeks ago. I continued. I wasn't told. I wasn't asked if I could come. I was completely left out. The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. The initial shock was visible on everyone's face. Some looked guilty, others simply stunned. One relative mumbled something about being too busy, but no one stepped forward to explain further. My heart pounded in my chest as I asked, "Why did you assume I wouldn't care? Why did you think I was too busy to mourn someone who meant so much to me?" The silence that followed was deafening. In that charged moment, I felt the full weight of years of neglect and misunderstanding. I wasn't just upset about a missed funeral. I was angry that I was regarded as expendable in a family where every other person was given a seat at the table. My voice grew stronger, filled with a determination that surprised even me. I deserved to be treated with respect. I deserved to be informed. I deserved to be seen. The confrontation had exploded like a dam breaking. Some relatives began to speak over one another, offering half-hearted excuses and awkward apologies. The room was divided between those who seemed genuinely remorseful and others who clung to the notion that I was simply overreacting. In that chaotic moment, I realized that this wasn't just a question of miscommunication. It was a symptom of deeper issues that had long been ignored. As the heated conversation escalated, old grievances and hidden truths started to surface. A once quiet cousin, Daniel, suddenly found his voice. "You've always been the one so wrapped up in your own life," he said, his tone defensive yet tinged with regret. "We never thought you'd care about these old traditions or remember us." His words, though poorly chosen, confirmed what I had long suspected. I wasn't the only one who had felt sidelined by the unspoken expectations of our family. Emotions ran high as one after another began sharing their versions of events. An aunt confessed that there had been a long-standing belief that I was too engrossed in my career to be bothered with family rituals, while another uncle admitted that he had assumed I would eventually catch on to the pattern. Each revelation added fuel to my burning anger, but beneath it all, I felt a deep sadness mourning, not just for Aunt Lorraine, but for the fractured bonds that had made me feel like an outsider in my own family. I found myself oscillating between righteous indignation and raw vulnerability. In the middle of the uproar, I caught sight of my reflection in a side mirror tear-streaked face that looked both determined and defeated. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had been wrong all along, if perhaps I had overreacted. But then, I remembered every missed phone call, every dismissive remark, every time I was left to wonder why I wasn't important. I wasn't overreacting. I was reclaiming the right to be heard in the midst of the chaos. I took a deep breath and said, "This isn't just about one funeral. It's about every single moment I've been made to feel invisible. I'm here now, and I deserve to be treated as a part of this family." My words resonated in the charged silence that followed. The room, once filled with voices and excuses, now lay quiet as each person absorbed the magnitude of what had just been said. The emotional intensity of that moment forced me to confront the painful truth. I had been complicit in accepting a life where my needs were secondary, where my presence was assumed rather than celebrated. In that instant of raw honesty, I realized that my life was mine to define, and that I couldn't allow the assumptions of others to dictate my self-worth. The revelations of that afternoon, though painful, served as a catalyst for a new beginning turning point where I vowed never again to be an afterthought. After the outburst, the atmosphere in the room shifted from volatile confrontation to a heavy, reflective silence. Some relatives left quietly, while others lingered in uncomfortable stillness, their expressions a mix of regret and uncertainty. I slowly excused myself, retreating to a quiet corner of the house where I could gather my thoughts and emotions, away from the prying eyes of those who had once taken me for granted. Sitting alone on the back porch as dusk settled in, I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of my emotions, anger, sorrow, and a bittersweet sense of relief. The cool evening air did little to calm the tempest inside, but it offered a moment of clarity. I realized that while the confrontation had exposed deep wounds, it had also opened the door to healing. I had finally spoken my truth, and though it hurt like 1,000 cuts, it was a necessary step toward reclaiming my place in a family that had long neglected to see me. In that quiet solitude, I resolved to redefine my boundaries. I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Some relatives might never change, and some relationships might remain irreparably broken. But I also recognized that I had taken the first step in refusing to be diminished any longer. I was determined to rebuild, not by forcing everyone to conform to my expectations, but by setting clear boundaries that honored my worth and validated my right to be heard. That night, as I sat with my thoughts and the soft hum of crickets in the background, I felt a cathartic release. The pain of exclusion was still raw, but it was now accompanied by a resolve to transform that pain into strength. I knew that I would have to continue this journey of self-discovery and healing, even if it meant standing alone at times. Yet, in that moment of catharsis, I allowed myself a small smile, a silent acknowledgement that I was finally free to choose how I wanted to be seen, both by others and by myself. In the weeks that followed the explosive reunion, the days began to settle into a new, albeit uncertain, rhythm. I sought solace in therapy, where I could explore the deep-seated wounds that years of neglect had inflicted. Each session felt like peeling back layers of old hurt, allowing me to understand that my feelings were valid and that I deserved better. I started reconnecting with parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of family expectations, pursuing hobbies, spending time with close friends who truly cared, and even revisiting old passions that once brought me joy. Slowly, tentative attempts were made by some family members to bridge the gap. A few relatives reached out with sincere apologies, expressing regret over the way I had been treated and promising to communicate better in the future. While not every conversation was a step toward reconciliation, each small gesture affirmed that healing was possible. I learned to accept that some wounds might never fully close, but that didn't mean I had to remain trapped in old patterns of self-doubt and neglect. I also began hosting small gatherings of my own intimate dinners with friends and a few supportive family members where honest conversations could take place without judgment. In these safe spaces, I was free to share my story, to laugh and cry, without the burden of unspoken expectations. Every day, I grew a little stronger, more confident in my ability to define my own worth, independent of the opinions of those who had once left me in the dark. As autumn turned to winter, I felt a quiet transformation taking root within me. One organized a small memorial celebration in honor of Aunt Lorraine, a heartfelt tribute that brought together those who truly understood the value of family and remembrance. The event wasn't grand or extravagant, it was a simple gathering of kindred spirits, united by loss and a shared desire to move forward with compassion and understanding. standing before the assembled group. I spoke candidly about the pain of exclusion and the importance of genuine connection. My words, filled with both sorrow and hope, resonated deeply with everyone present. I realized that while I couldn't force the entire family to change overnight, I could create a new paradigm for how I interacted with those who mattered. I began setting clear boundaries, communicating my needs openly, and refusing to let the assumptions of the past dictate my future. In the months that followed, life continued, with its ups and downs, but I no longer felt like a ghost drifting at the margins of my own family's story. I forged new traditions, built stronger bonds with those who respected me, and learned to let go of the hurt that had once defined me. The journey was far from over, but each day was a step toward a future where I was seen, heard, and valued for who I truly was. Now, as I sit by my window on a quiet winter morning, watching the soft snowflakes drift down and cover the world in a peaceful hush, I reflect on the long road I've traveled. The pain of being left in the dark has been replaced by a warm light of self-acceptance and resilience. I have learned that while family can sometimes be the source of deep hurt, it can also be the catalyst for profound personal growth. My story is not one of bitterness or regret. It is a story of reclaiming my identity, of standing up for my worth, and of finding beauty in the struggle to be truly seen. I know there will be moments when old wounds flare up, when the scars of exclusion remind me of days gone by. But I also know that I am no longer defined by those moments. I have chosen a new path, one where honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect guide my relationships. And as I move forward, I carry with me the knowledge that my voice matters, because I am not just a bystander in my own life, but the author of my own story. In the end, learn that forgiveness, both of others and of myself, is the key to healing. I now welcome the future with open arms, ready to build a life where every moment is lived with intention and every relationship is nurtured with care. This isn't the end of my story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one where I finally belong.